The old story has it that as we go through life, we really don't change. We just become more of the same. You look around you as the years go by, and it seems a very valid premise. People don't change. As a matter of fact, most of us resist change very strongly. Yet change is a sure thing. The only variable is rate. Slow we read as evolution, and fast as revolution. All of this is one way to introduce the change that occurred in my life some 30 years ago. It definitely was not more of the same. It was something I didn't worry about for a very simple reason. I didn't know it existed. There is still some discussion as to whether it was accidental or evolutionary in my case. Certainly it was revolutionary for me. Now, after many years of living with the change and exploring it, the very least I can be sure of is it didn't harm me. The most I can say is I don't know of any other facet of human existence that can produce such a broad scope of knowledge and experience. Yet it remains relatively ignored in our present cultural context. What is it? I'm sure you already know. We call it the out-of-body state. Back in 1958, when it first began to happen to me, it was called astral projection. The label felt uncomfortable to a psychologist friend and to me too. It seemed too occult, too 16th century. So we began to call it the out-of-body experience, or OBE. It fit better in the double speak of the late 20th century. No respectable researcher or scientist would be caught fooling around with astral projection, but just maybe out-of-body might slip through. Also, it was graphic, to the point. The out-of-body is a state of consciousness where you are distinct and separate from your physical body. This separateness can be 2 inches or 2,000 miles or more. You can think, act, and perceive in this state much as you do physically, with several important exceptions. With a little practice, your 5 senses can be replicated while in the OB. Replication is the right description because you're not using sensory mechanisms and organs as you do physically. What you're actually using is instead something no one that I know of has taken the trouble to find out. In my own history, I began to see first of all. I don't know how precisely I started to do that in the out-of-body state. After considerable experimentation, I learned to hear and then to feel. I've never learned how to smell or taste while in the OB state. No particular reason for this except that the need to do so never came up. Why would anyone want to go out of their body? Well, I didn't have much choice. All I wanted to do was to keep it from happening at first. Then, when I slowly learned the potentials involved, I became excited and went to work at learning how to control this activity. If all of this sounds wild, weird, or nonsense, you're just about where I was 30 years ago, and I don't blame you. If someone had told me then that I would be talking with you now about such things, I would have snorted in disgust and disbelief, and I would have recommended that he see a psychiatrist. But this is now, and some of my best friends are psychiatrists, but not in a doctor-patient relationship. Today, there are over 120 consultants and associates ranging from MDs, psychologists, college professors, physicists, and scientists to engineers and corporate executives, all actively involved in the research and educational organization we call the Monroe Institute. Each has a personal or professional interest in the out-of-body state. The Institute is internationally known for its studies in human consciousness and the use of sound wave patterns to assist changes in states of being. One of these, of course, is the out-of-body state. Recent research, not ours, has shown that 25% of our nation's population remembers having at least one spontaneous out-of-body experience. If you think about it, perhaps you'll find you're part of that 25%. The very fact that you're listening now indicates at least a casual interest or perhaps a search for answers. Many such out-of-bodies have been attached to the sleep state, dismissed as simply dreams, except that they didn't fit the hazy quality of dreams. They were much too vivid and real to be so classified. Other spontaneous OBs have occurred under anesthesia during surgery, where the patient found himself some 6 or 8 feet above the operating table and later reported what he saw and heard from this vantage point. which would have been a physical impossibility. These are happening every day. They're unreported for the most part. Others occur during moments of unconsciousness caused by an accident or something like that. Most are relegated to an odd event and tucked away in memory as an anomaly that never happened. Our belief systems wouldn't let it be otherwise. Again, in my own case, it took a full year of spontaneous and willful out-of-body excursions with growing validation and documentations before I accepted the reality of it. The most profound of the spontaneous out-of-bodies is what is now called the near-death experience. Again, these are taking place daily, usually during surgery and under anesthesia. More and more are being reported due to the efforts and publicity by several organizations that have sprung up to investigate this phenomenon. Most near-death out-of-body experiences have the effect of changing completely the belief systems of the patient and thus their lives. They come back knowing they are more than their physical body, and without any equivocation, they will survive physical death. You can understand what I mean by profound if you will think about how such knowledge, not belief, or hope, or faith, would affect your life. That you are indeed more than your physical body. That you do indeed survive physical death. Think about just knowing that. Just those two as knowns with absolutely no conditions or complication. Human history is full of such references to what we call out of body. You're beside yourself, out of your mind, fall asleep, wake up, pass out, and it goes on and on. Even to witches who rode a broomstick. Myth or misconception. Every era has its own interpretation, and it's a lot of smoke to be without a fire. In our own effort over these many years, the Monroe Institute research projects have taken it the hard way. We have not used drugs or anesthesia or any other body-invasive techniques, yet we have been able to induce and train subjects to achieve OBs in a constant and objective manner.
This is important because our knowledge of not only the transition of consciousness, but what occurs during death and the non-physical realities we enter have been explored and documented now for many decades, not only by myself, but many other people. So much has been learned. What's important to realize that this information now is readily available. For instance, we now know, based on out-of-body experiences that have been documented over many years, is that consciousness continues beyond the body. The scientific concept that the brain is the origin of consciousness is no longer accurate. We know for a fact that we can continue to exist and explore beyond our physical limits, and we can do so repeatedly. I and others have had thousands of out-of-body experiences and have done so with control. And now we can even, many people are learning how to self-initiate out-of-body experiences. So the important point here is that the knowledge has expanded exponentially. We know what the non-physical realities are like. So we know much more about how to prepare for transition. For instance, during the past 40 years, we have learned that the universe is a multidimensional continuum, and that when you have an out-of-body experience, you're actually shifting your consciousness inward into a less dense energy dimension. We've learned that the physical world is just the epidermis of the universe, the thin outer crust, and that every out-of-body experience and every near-death experience is actually a shift of consciousness inward to the next dimensional space that is already with us and within us. We've learned that everyone continues, that consciousness never dies. We've learned that the universe is a welcoming place for all of us, and that we are not biological beings. We are non-physical beings that are using a biological body for a very brief period of time. This is important because the more knowledge we gain, the more we will be able to be effective explorers of consciousness, not only now, but during our transition and during our afterlife adventure. Everything continues. We've learned that we can enter and the non-physical realities, many people at will, with experience and control. And we can extend these periods of non-physical exploration. In other words, many of the assumptions of humanity are false or flawed tremendously. This is important. There's 7.5 billion people on the planet, and most people are dependent upon belief systems. Unfortunately, many of us have been taught from birth some very negative beliefs, one of which is that we cannot obtain the answers for ourselves. So we must depend upon belief systems to guide us into the afterlife. We know today, based on decades of out-of-body and near-death experiences, that nothing could be further from the truth. Each of us is an eternal being, and we are all on this wonderful, magnificent journey of consciousness. And the more knowledge that we gain about our journey of consciousness, the more prepared we will be to enter the thought-responsive realms that we will all enter at the point of transition. The more prepared we are, the more knowledgeable we are about the functioning of non-physical reality, the more we will be able to enhance our journey of consciousness. And it gives us the ability to escape from the many negative belief systems that so dominate our culture and our society. We have the ability to liberate ourselves from all the dense realities that exist. We have the ability to expand and enhance our journey of consciousness by learning the tools, the techniques, and the knowledge of our journey of consciousness.
Byron is a musician, recording artist, and producer. He has a PhD in transpersonal psychology, a master's in counseling. He has extensive experience with Stanislav Grof's holotropic breathwork. He has also trained, studied, and worked with several other luminaries, including Jack Kornfield, Hamid Ali, Don America Yabar, and others. People that know Hemisync might be most familiar with him with the Shaman's Heart program, which he began in 2006, or actually 2005, followed that up with Spirit Gathering in 2006, medicine work in 2013. Mark Seelig also has a background in therapeutic and academic training. He has a PhD in psychotherapy, also has a lot of experience with holotropic breathwork, has been deeply influenced by Asian mysticism and spirituality, as well as South American ceremonial rituals and the musical traditions of India. As you can tell by their backgrounds, it is not tough to see why they've collaborated so much. There's a lot of commonality there.
Sure, yeah. Go ahead, Byron.
Okay, well, I got into, just by happenstance, I got turned on to Stanislav Grof's work. I never heard of holotropic breathwork, but I was an addictions counselor back in the mid-'80s. And by happenstance, I got to go to one of their workshops as a kind of more education, following up, that kind of thing. And so we got to do the breath work, and I'll tell you, it just completely blew my mind, and I knew I had to follow this up, and I got into the training just as soon as I could, and was certified in '89, and done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of breath works over the years, facilitating my own and facilitating groups, and it's an extraordinary process, and using music, powerful music. And basically, it's a non-drug approach to Stan Grof's psychedelic psychotherapy model. That's kind of well, Mark, you can get in and kind of tag that if you want. And
yeah, sure. I was born in West Berlin, and very early on, we came in touch with all the what we now call shamanic medicines, what used to be called drugs, which is not really an appropriate term actually, in West Berlin. And so I tried experimenting with these things as a child, actually, very early on, and it opened some doors. And so since then, I've been fascinated with what we could call shamanic states of consciousness, expanded modalities of reaching other layers within our potential of our consciousness. And so that has been with me all these years, and I've explored this in many ways. I also have a master's in divinity and theology, even though I've never been to church, but have also been interested in Buddhism. And then music came in at a very early age, and I realized that music is another wonderful and beautiful method that's been appreciated by all cultures and all races to induce states of healing, expanded states of consciousness, and so forth. And so that's how very early on Byron and I met and shared our interests.
So that is very interesting. So we're talking about using holotropic breath work and shamanic practice and music to access different layers of consciousness. Lots of folks that might be watching or listening to this might have some experience in accessing different layers of consciousness. I think one of the issues people run into is, well, what do I do with this experience once I've kind of entered into it? And I think that's where your backgrounds in transpersonal psychology become very useful. And just kind of borrowing one passage from Mark's website, if I could just briefly kind of quote it here. All human conflicts are driven by the psyche's innate attempts to heal itself. Therefore, these approaches attempt to induce, reinforce, and support processes of transformation in all their facets, instead of pathologizing or marginalizing certain forms that do not fit the cultural agenda. And that's really well put. And
Thank
just
you.
kind of, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Way to go, Mark. I like
Yeah.
that. Can I use that?
It's a lot to be done for both of you. Thank you.
That's really well put. And just to kind of put this in more concrete terms for folks, what are some examples of these types of pathologies that you might be referring to, and like how do they conflict with the cultural agenda?
Right. You want to go for it, Byron?
No, go ahead, because
Okay.
you're using your quote, and then I'll come in with
Yeah. Yes, so given our mutual background in psychotherapy, we're all well familiar with the typical ways of diagnosing certain behaviors or problems that people show up with. And they are mostly, driven by a what's been called consensus trance in transpersonal psychology, meaning to express the fact that we are all streamlined in our in the ways we've been raised to see reality, and we've been taught a certain definition of reality.
Yeah.
Now, what we know from the native cultures, from many spiritual traditions, Buddhism calls it Maya illusion, for example. Yeah, we know from these traditions that our perception of reality and our definition is probably very marginal, or is a selective reception of what's out there. And so a different definition of what we call pathologies in Western societies is actually rooted in the wisdom traditions of all peoples of this earth. And they say there is nothing that is sick or unhealthy per se. If I embed whatever a person is going through in a larger frame, in a larger context, I can learn from this crisis that this person is going through, and I can support the person in understanding that this crisis has a meaning. And so unpathologizing view of that would be the view that native traditions have taken. They are saying a person is going through an initiatory crisis that will prompt them to go on a vision quest to understand what their crisis means. And then with the right kind of support, emerge from the crisis with a very specific and individual task within their tribe or within humanity.
Gotcha.
Well put.
Yeah, what Mark said. I'd like to add to that is that in our Western model, our model of psychology and psychiatry, it's a medical model. It's based on our medical model, and so by definition, it's focusing on disease, pathology, and that kind of thing. But what we know from research and of course the ancient wisdom traditions that these conditions or these diagnoses are mostly transient. In fact, 80 to 90% of them are transient if, and this is a qualifier, of course, if the person is supported properly instead of medicated and overly diagnosed. Because what we know is that the medications, the drugs, and stuff like that can start freezing and actually helping to create the condition that they're in the diagnostic criteria. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy thing. Yeah. And it's really a system that is not working at all and is causing a lot of problems. I mean, look at the depression's an epidemic. Yeah. You can speak to that in many ways, of course, but not the least of which is the overprescribing and incorrectly diagnosing these folks who are just going through normal and natural processes, but we don't have the approaches or the methods in order to totally support the person in working it through and getting on the other side of it, which becomes a transformative experience. And there's where the integrated processes and tools come in. Garrett, you kind of open the door on that when you say, what do you do after you open up? If and consciousness is expanded and there's information given, gifts, insights, all kinds of things like that. Well, then comes the hard part, and that's what we call, in general terms, just integration in the integrated process. So it's really the most important part, and it's also the hardest. It's easy to change and shift consciousness. You just apply the right method, whether it be Hemisync, psychedelics, meditation, breath work, any kind of thing like that. It's pretty easy to do. But where do you go from there? And that's the most important component, period. Because you can just you can do it again, but nothing in your life changes. I like what Ralph Metzer, late great Ralph Metzer said. He said, a changed consciousness does not necessarily translate to a changed life. And so we're talking about the pragmatic aspects of this. I'm kind of at the point in my life, and have been for a while, where, it's cool to change consciousness, but I'm more interested in how it's going to change my life. How it's going to make my life better, my relationships, my work more productive and more meaningful, those kinds of questions, And we could just go on forever with this stuff because we love it so much. But
so that's great stuff. So I mean, as the individual is on the path, as they start to awaken, as they start to reconsider who they are and what they take themselves to be, it is natural actually to find that reality is not what they thought it was, that they are not what they thought they were. And with that can come a feeling of, or an experience of falling apart, which feel like crisis.
Yeah. And it can produce a crisis. In practical terms, a crisis can emerge because your life gets messier, those kinds of things. Absolutely.
Right. And so this is all part of a natural process. But the Western model is to brand it as psychosis, to medicate that.
Yeah.
And so instead,
neuroses and that kind of stuff. And you need to get the symptoms back down. Control and constrict. So the whole approach is constrictive in nature. Yeah. It contracts. It's the opposite of expanding.
Yes.
And so the internal struggles, and you mentioned something earlier about reading off of Mark's website there, that all the suffering that we go through and the problems we have in our society. Well, it's just an externalization of the internal battles we have going on. We're trying to. The soul is wanting to expand and open and know itself fully. and we're applying tools and methods and substances that at the same time trying to shut it down. And so, it's an internal battle. It's crazy.
So there are many different types of shamanism. Hemisync has produced many different albums which relate to the topic. I've personally done more than a few podcasts on the subject. So can you just tell us a bit about your own personal or particular brand of shamanism? Not personal, but the brand that you practice.
Well, there are different versions, different teachers, and all of that. Ultimately, it is a return to nature. That's the main thing. It's about nature as a template to teach us about ourselves. When you think of humans, we're actually children on this earth, and the nature beings, the plant people, the stone people, the animal people have been around a lot longer than we have, and humans have the unique ability as children to think that they can become something other than themselves, think that they can become something different. They can live in mentally constructed world rather than the reality of the here and now, and rather than living from our own essence, in the same way that the shark only wants to be itself or the daisy only knows how to be itself. We have this unique ability and difficult tendency to become something other. So it's about looking to nature. So when I think of shamanism, it's about looking to nature to remind us to not do that, to stay, to find our own true essence, in the same way that when we look at nature, everything is of itself. It can only be a spontaneous and unapologetic expression of itself. And we as humans are trying to do that too. And when we do, we get a lot of help from the upper world spirits, and we find a kind of flow, because we are flowing with living from an essence of what the earth intended us to be. So that's what I mean by shamanism, I think.
Cool. And so I think people think of kind of a few major branches of shamanism. Probably most prominently here in the States is the Native American tradition, but there's also a very active Asian tradition. And yours is mostly based on Hawaiian shamanism, correct? I mean, you actually live in Maui, and
I live in Maui. Yeah. Someone's got to do it, Garrett.
Yeah, tough life.
Yeah,
tough assignment.
But I landed on Hawaiian after I had worked with shamans on 3 different continents and studied a lot of different teachers and different traditions. And a couple things that I saw, which was that there really was a universal shamanic paradigm in whether or not I was in Bali, whether or not it was in Brazil, whether or not it was Native American shamans. That was very much clear. But the thing about the Hawaiian piece was that the Hawaiians had a very psychological aspect to their indigenous teachings, which I really liked, because I'm a bit of a that's the work that I do, and I'm a bit of a psychological nerd, and to find an earth-based tradition that was mirroring so much of what we understand about contemporary psychology and transpersonal psychology in particular was really exciting, and that really did come from the Hawaiian tradition.
Cool. And so there are quite a few terms that we kind of toss around casually, or Hawaiian terms that we toss around casually as mainlanders. But let's just start with the most probably common one of all, aloha. Can you talk a bit about what that means?
Yeah,
and especially in the context of shamanism.
Yeah. So aloha there are 2 different syllables that you can look at. Alo, which means to share, and ha, which means breath, or oha, which means joy. So aloha is to share life, to share breath, to share joy with another. So when we say aloha, it is or when we live in aloha, it is a connecting energy. It is which is of course what the essence of love is. And another concept in Hawaii is a concept called malama ka'aina, which means to love the land as you would love a sibling or a parent. So the idea being that and Hawaiians really do feel this. So imagine being somewhere, living somewhere where you say, I love this place so much, And with that fullness, and I love this land, and I'm so grateful and humble to be here, and to walk on this land is such an honor. And then to say aloha to someone, that it's really coming from that place. So that's aloha. Aloha brings things together. It connects. It's a connector, just like love is.
See, I think lots of folks think that aloha just means hello or goodbye, but it means so much more than that. And that is a common thread that you find throughout all Hawaiian terms, including the word Hawaii itself, right?
Right. Hawaii, ha, which means breath or life force, vai, which means water, and i, which means the supreme. So it is where where breath and water and life come together. That's what that means. Yeah, the Hawaiian language is really fascinating. I'm certainly not a scholar on it, but it's fascinating in that everything in it, every syllable in it contains multiple meanings, and everything you can think of as a kind of verb, which means that it has this lived quality, just like the nature of reality itself. Everything is almost a gerund. So it's Hawaii-ing, so to speak. It's that energy, or aloha-ing, it's that energy. It moves. It has movement in it. Yeah.
And I think this kind of underscores the importance of language, just in culture and in mindset. And as part of that, it really highlights how spirituality in Hawaiian culture is a serious practice. It's an entire lifestyle. It permeates the culture. Whereas, on the mainland or in Western society in general, it's kind of more of a hobby, isn't it?
Yeah, and honestly, if I had to be honest, I'd say it's more of a hobby here too. I think.
Okay, fair enough.
Meaning that I think that this place it has really been colonized, and I think that, and I've seen this in other indigenous cultures that I've worked with and that I've studied, and a lot of the anthropological material talks about this too. Is that a lot of these cultures, they now want cell phones and they want fancy cars and they want the things that the modern amenities that make life easier, and so a lot of times it's the students of these indigenous cultures that actually help keep it going in some way. It's pretty audacious for a Caucasian guy to write a book on Hawaiian spirituality. And what I found is that the Hawaiians, who are now my friends, I live among them. I literally live in a community where I'm not with just the rich white people, down the street. I live in it with those people. And what I found more than anything else is that the Hawaiians say, "Wow, you care enough to invest in us," and that's not something that you see very often. So yeah, and I think that living a spiritual life, living a true spiritual life, is more than anything else the confrontation of our own compartmentalization of living a spiritual life. So it is about taking it way past hobby. Mm-hmm. And into every action that we take and every breath that we breathe.
And part of doing that, or really the essence of doing that, is this concept of huna, isn't it? I mean, that's kind of what's been lost in treating, Hawaiian shamanism or spirituality in general as a hobby. Can you tell us about huna and what it means?
Yeah, so huna, the huna that I know, huna means secret. That's the essence of that word. But a secret not being something withheld, but something that is difficult to see, like fine sea spray or dust, something that's there, but it's hard to see, which of course is the essence of any esoteric wisdom. It's what's underneath. It's what's underneath the explicate reality or the outward reality. So huna is a philosophy, a spiritual philosophy made up of a bunch of things, but certainly 7 ideas that help us align with the nature of the unconscious mind, that the nature of love, the nature of the present moment, the nature of how energy works, and they're very simple ideas. But when you learn them and you adhere to them, they open you into a shamanic cosmological viewpoint and way of seeing the world that puts you in flow with what we were talking about earlier, which was being more like nature and learning how we use the power of our own minds and our own intentions and our own actions to consciously create our life and evolve appropriately, and evolve in a way that we were meant to evolve. The sense of, we're wired toward our own creative evolution. We can feel it. When you take an action that feels right and good and growthful, you can feel it. There's a felt sense to it. And when you do it the other way, there's a sense that it doesn't feel right. So we are wired toward that. And Huna helps us align our mind in congruence with that.
Clairvoyance really is clear seeing. That's what the word means, and that's actually what the experience is like. It really varies somewhat, situation to situation and person to person. Usually, clairvoyant experiences will be on the screen of your mind. So that kind of inner vision where you daydream, that's where you'll notice clairvoyant imagery. Once in a while, something will be so strong that you will see it as if it is outside of you in your environment. And, we can talk about examples of that as we go on. But most of the time, it's going to be on the screen of your mind.
Cool. And so do people generally experience it with their eyes wide open, with their eyes closed?
It's another good question. So I think in the beginning, people might, as they practice, notice more easily these images when their eyes are closed, because it kind of cuts out the normal day-to-day distractions, including and especially visual distractions like what's in your space. But a lot of the kind of random clairvoyant experiences will happen while your eyes open doing something else, maybe when your mind's a little bit quiet. So you can be having a conversation with someone and have a flash of something across the screen of your mind. The more you practice, the more easily you'll be able to recognize the difference between clairvoyant information and just kind of your thoughts and feelings and imagination.
Yeah, interesting. So a flash kind of seems like it would probably be like a still image, right? And then how common is it to have, say, moving images?
I think both happen. I think the still images are probably more frequent. And I'll give you an example. So if you're going to look for a car, right? Maybe you're looking at used cars and you're going to a few different places and you see one that looks really shiny and great and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to buy this one. The price is right. And then you see a flash of a lemon in your mind or or a junkyard or something like that. You might say, oh, wait a minute. That would be a still image that you would only need like a fraction of a second to know what that means.
Interesting.
And that's pretty common.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's movie-like, though.
So in that instance, it was still, it was symbolic. Your eyes were probably open or closed. So that's a very interesting application for clairvoyance. And I can think of probably a bunch of others. Are there any that maybe folks, wouldn't generally consider?
I think that it's not unusual at all for us to have these related to work. So as an example, I'm going to give you an example of a protracted image that is not typical, but if something is really significant, you might have. So I had a client years ago. Like many of my clients, this person had a lot of medical issues and a lot of significant emotional challenges. And I at the time, I was seeing this person a few times a week. Sometimes I do that. Over the course of this week, where I maybe saw the person 3 times, it looked like there was a fog in front of their face. And by the 3rd time I saw them, it was a much more dense fog to the point it was hard to focus on them. And, we're not sitting so far away. And I thought, oh, I really need to get new glasses. It was just like, what does this mean? But the thing is, I didn't notice it around anybody else. And what that told me was, I always pay attention, but now I really need to pay attention. And so, I also noted to her other providers, the things that I noticed in the objective non-psychic world, because that's what they could hear. And it turned out this person had to be rushed to the emergency room later that week.
Wow.
So sometimes when people are physically like having some sort of situation where they're not well or their health is notably declining, that might be what I would see, and that might be more prolonged. It's not exactly a movie. I've had movie experiences too.
Yeah.
But most of the time, I think we get quick flashes, and they might be paired with other psychic senses, like a clear knowing of what this means, or, your own voice saying, watch out for XYZ.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you actually make the point that as you develop one psychic sense, it tends to open the other ones up along
Yeah.
with.
Really does.
Mhm.
I think that's because if you think about your intuitive senses, your psychic senses, and your subconscious as like a friend, like somebody you're getting to know, the more you start talking to each other and finding that you're listening, the more the line of communication opens up, the more natural it becomes. And so now you've told yourself, I'm ready to receive intuitive information.
Yeah.
And now it's going to come through in more ways that you can understand.
Mm-hmm. And so that's also an interesting point that you raised there with the subconscious, because that's a big part of unlocking this gift, right? This dormant ability, or for most folks, it's dormant.
Right. I mean, I think so. And for people who aren't familiar with that term, as a psychologist, we think about, your conscious awareness, the things that you're very present to and aware of in your environment, the conscious thoughts you're having. The subconscious is kind of the part of you that's daydreaming. It's the movie in your mind that's kind of in the background. It's what comes to the forefront when you're sleeping. And it seems to be like that's a receiver for intuitive information.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons why meditation and tools like that can be so helpful is that meditation, like mindfulness, can help us tune out distractions so that the language of intuition and the language of the unconscious becomes clearer and more discernible, even in the midst of everyday distractions.
Those who know the Wyrd, Neo-Shamans in Contemporary Society, by David Ritchie. Chapter 2: Transpersonal Consciousness. Central to the practice of shamanism is the ability to facilely enter and leave the altered state of consciousness in which the shaman does his work. There are generally considered to be 3 ordinary states of consciousness, OSCs: waking consciousness, dreaming consciousness, and sleeping consciousness. But these supposedly discrete and differentiated ordinary states of consciousness are simply theoretical constructs, and seldom, if ever, appear in their pure form. Most states of consciousness are admixtures of the waking, dreaming, and sleeping states, and hence are altered states. Because these ordinary states can mix in any proportion, the number of possible combinations is essentially infinite. Of particular import relative to this discussion is when a dreaming state of consciousness overlaps onto a prevailing waking state of consciousness. That results in a condition known as hypnagogia. Hypnagogia is characterized by brainwave frequency patterns in the EEG theta range, 4 to 8 cycles per second. Synesthesias, muscle atonia, myoclonic jerks, sudden involuntary muscle contractions triggered by subcortical seizures, a loosening of ego boundaries, extremely vivid imagery, perceptual intermixing of stimuli from different sources. In the hypnagogic condition, the mind is not able to maintain metacognition, i.e., it is incapable of thinking about its own thinking. It is not reflexively self-aware, and dream stimuli cannot be differentiated from environmental stimuli. The hypnagogic experiencer is incapable of thinking this is not happening or that is not real. He becomes completely absorbed in internally generated imagery and activities, loses his reality testing ability, is generally unable to distinguish that which is self from that which is not self, and may experience his consciousness as free-floating and not connected to the brain-body. While it was previously believed that hypnagogia was invariably followed by sleep, that turns out to be untrue. Hypnagogia followed by waking, technically spoken of as hypnopompia, can also occur. Moreover, some individuals, notably shamans, are capable of deliberately accessing the hypnagogic state, maintaining it for an extended period of time, and then returning to an ordinary state of consciousness, OSC. This is essentially the transpersonal state of consciousness, combining elements of both dreaming and wakefulness, and setting the stage for extremely vivid imagery, in which the shaman does his work. Shamans use a variety of techniques to assist themselves in entering the appropriate state of consciousness, among them being monotonous chanting, heat, fasting, sleep deprivation, and rhythmic drumming. The drumming is of particular interest because the drum beat frequencies that predominate in shamanic ceremonies are in the range of 4 to 8 cycles per second. Brain wave patterns, especially in the temporal lobes, in the boundary area between the EEG theta pattern 4 to 8 cycles per second and the EEG alpha pattern 8 to 14 cycles per second, are characteristic of the hypnagogic state, and in susceptible individuals can facilitate brainwave entrainment. Another brainwave factor involved in altered states of consciousness, one that is every bit as important as predominant brainwave frequencies, is brainwave coherence. Brainwave coherence has to do with brainwaves from different parts of the brain exhibiting the same frequency and amplitude and being mutually entrained so that they operate together in a smooth, continuous pattern. The more focused one's awareness is, the more coherent one's brainwaves tend to be, which is possibly the flow state. In the ordinary sleeping state of consciousness, there is very little coherence. In the ordinary waking state of consciousness, there is more in imaginative involvement. In a creative endeavor, there is still more. And in advanced meditation, there is a very high level of coherence. Michael Harner speaks of the appropriate state of consciousness as the shamanic state of consciousness, SSC. In my own research, I have determined that there are other people besides shamans who are facile at entering such states of consciousness. I speak of them as anomalously sensitive persons, ASPs, and they may be thought of as people who are unusually sensitive, not only in the transpersonal and altered states of consciousness realms, but also in the physiological, cognitive, and emotional realms as well. ASPs are born, not made, because their neurophysiological structuring is different from the norm. Shamans are a subset of ASPs, and while all shamans are ASPs, not all ASPs are shamans. Specific to shamanic practices are the journeying of the spirit to alternate realities, the assistance of a complex of spirit guides, and the purpose of helping others. Just as shamans are a subset of ASPs, the shamanic state of consciousness, SSC, is a subset of the state of transpersonal consciousness, TPC, experienced by ASPs. That state of consciousness in which an individual's having transpersonal experiences, TPEs, is facilitated. Transpersonal experiences can be defined as experiences that occur beyond the ordinary differentiated boundaries of ego, space, and time. Experiences that suggest the essential interconnectedness and/or absolute unity of all that ever was, is, or will be. Experiences that imply the existence of mind as distinct from brain, of spirit, of soul. In this writing, whenever I speak of anomalously sensitive persons, I am intending to include shamans. Likewise, whenever I speak of the state of transpersonal consciousness, I am intending to include the shamanic state of consciousness. Generally, people, unless they are mystics, metaphysicists, or some quantum physicists, have difficulty grasping the concept of those alternate realities that can be experienced when one is in a state of transpersonal consciousness. For most people, most of the time, there is only one reality, that being consensus reality, in which almost everybody agrees about the reality status of those things that are being perceived. A consensus reality control commission has yet to be established, but perhaps that day will soon be upon us. Given that observation with one's own senses is the basis for the empirical definition of subjective reality, however, it can be seen that reality determination is not always necessarily consensus-based, but can be a function of one's state of consciousness. An individual in a state of TPC often experiences mental imagery that is so strong and so vivid that it becomes the basis for reality determination. Yeah, just have a DMT experience, then you will see how vivid colors can get. It's beautiful. While that which is experienced as real by an individual in a state of TPC might appear illusory to an individual who is in an ordinary state of consciousness, the converse is also true. That which is experienced as real by an individual in an ordinary state of consciousness might appear to be illusory to an individual who is in a state of transpersonal consciousness. Ha! Yeah, just turn it around. Both would be correct from the perspective of their particular states of consciousness. Reality is a fiction invented by those who feel insecure without a solid ground to stand on. Anonymous. Reality is for those who lack imagination. Bumper sticker. No one has yet proven that there is only one state of consciousness that is valid for first-hand observations. A number of writers have offered lists of the traits and characteristics common to those people whom I now speak of as anomalously sensitive persons. Each list has its strengths and each has its weakness. Synthesizing those lists, it can be said that ASPs exhibit sensitivity, perceptiveness, awareness of, and responsiveness to subtle stimuli, emotional acuity, ability to transcend the content and meaning of perceptions, independence, ego strength. I don't know. I'm not so sure about that. Maybe strengths in general, but not that egocentric narcissistic trait. And selfishness, that's the opposite. It's rather a strength to accept your own sensitivity. Having integrated the whole package without the pathologizing attitude of Western society. So you accept yourself of who you are, you know yourself, and you do not let society marginalize and judge you into being a lesser human being. You just see it as a different perception. The prevalent left hemisphere perception versus a more right hemisphere whole brain perception. And those two are just so different. The left hemisphere perception being narrow-minded and categorizes everything, not seeing the whole picture. Yeah. So yes, independence, being free of the judgment of others, not letting any self-proclaimed left hemisphere dominant so-called expert tell you who you are, gaslight you, telling you that your perception is wrong or deficient or pathological. Because really, you have to turn it upside down and look at it the other way around. See things for what they are, just that. And that in itself, could be called strength. An internal locus of evaluation, exactly. The ability to shape personal beliefs and values without reference to consensual norms, exactly that. A subjective sense of psychological freedom, a willingness to take risks. Cognitive complexity, fluency, flexibility, and rapidity of thought, the ability to hold numerous ideas simultaneously, the ability to toy with, analyze, and recognize multiple concepts. Openness. This is always a right hemisphere dominant trait. Opposite of left hemisphere narrow-mindedness, judgmentalism. The openness is flexible, permeable boundaries in concepts, beliefs, and hypotheses, receptivity to the original, the novel, and the unfamiliar, ability to tolerate conceptual ambiguity without forcing closure. non-rationality, holistic, aggregative, visual style of thinking. Oh yeah. Facility at accessing altered states of consciousness, ability to transcend self, not self, differentiation, ability to access primary process, motivation, and imagery, intuitive and spiritual orientation. An ASP is definitely not just one of the herd. Oh yeah, definitely not so. Ernest Hartman speaks of such people as having thin boundaries between waking, dreaming, and sleeping states of consciousness, and suggests some additional characteristics that they have in common. They are likely to have atypical lifestyles and be particularly artistic and creative. Yep. Be especially open, trusting, and vulnerable, and that makes them, unfortunately, targets for predators and parasitic, narcissistic individuals. It is known. Have a difficult time dealing with stress. Yeah. And when I was still working in that stressful job, that resulted in chronic pain issues just from the stress. And then terrain theory, if you are familiar with that, change your environment and you will change your state of well-being too. It is especially true for very sensitive individuals. Exhibit unusual sensitivities involving light, sound, emotions, and empathy. Have a history of ill health. Yeah, just what I said. Stress will cause physical issues, various symptoms. And don't let doctors tell you it's all in your head. It is not. It's the environment you find yourself in that will be the cause of your health issues. Also, diet, the way you eat, you can totally help yourself to more well-being and less symptomology the way you eat or avoid certain foods. You can totally reverse symptoms just by changing the way you eat. And know that is a fact, regardless of what a doctor trained in the Western way of perception will tell you. Don't believe what they tell you. Experiment yourself. Try things out. If it works for you, good. If it doesn't, then yeah, move on to the next thing and try that out. Be open for experimentation. Your body will tell you. You will see that immediately. The way you feel, how your well-being will improve. Have a history of transpersonal experiences. Okay. There are many different varieties of transpersonal experiences. Lists developed by other researchers include scores. I suggest that there are 18 that are probably most representative, namely experiences of transpersonal perceptions, déjà vu, the strong feeling that some person, place, or situation has been experienced before, even though the experience is apparently occurring for the first time. Synchronicity is a big one. The occurrence of a pattern of significant events, apparently causally unrelated, the connections among which seem to be too meaningful to be coincidence. Telepathy, transmission and or reception of thoughts with another person without normal communication or clues. Precognition, accurate knowledge of an event that will take place in the future and that could not be predicted by logical means. Psychic dream, a dream that matches in detail an event the dreamer did not know about or have reason to expect at the time of the dream. Clairvoyance, including clairaudience, clairsentience, claircognizance, accurate awareness of events that are not available to usual sensory impressions. Experiences of transpersonal influence, psychic healing, healing of an injury or illness through non-physical means such as prayer, meditation, laying on of hands. Yeah, this one I have experienced myself. Therapeutic touch, etc. Electrical psychokinesis, the influencing of electrical and or electronic equipment, causing lights to go on and off, causing malfunctions in watches, calculators, computers, etc. through no natural physical means. Psychokinesis, the causing of changes in the location or state of a physical object, metal bending, fire starting, things falling to the floor. Yeah, once I had, unfortunately, a very painful experience. A cup of hot tea jumping out from the shelf, and there was no earthquake, nothing, nobody bumping into the furniture, nothing. I was alone, standing about 50 centimeters away from the shelf, and it just jumped out on the floor, on my foot, and yeah, the result was a severe burn. And then all night I applied hand healing on this burned foot. It burned like hell. I didn't sleep all night. It was the day before my birthday, weirdly. And I applied this hand healing, Reiki, Chinchin Shutsu, whatever you want to call it. And to this day, I am certain that this hand healing helped to prevent scarring. I don't have a scar from that burn, and it should have resulted in a severe scar. It was a bad burning. It took time to heal, yes, but no scarring. Anyway, through no natural physical means. Yeah, as I said, there was no earthquake, nothing that could have caused this cup jumping down from the shelf it was on. Just happened. Completely unexpectedly. Experiences of transpersonal manifestation of mind. contact with spirit guides, mental contact with spirits or higher beings in which the individual receives information or guidance while remaining aware of what is happening. Out-of-body experience, the sense that one's awareness or mind has moved outside the physical body to a different location and the body can actually be seen from that location, other than during a near-death experience covered below. Past life recall, the recollection of details and or emotions of what apparently was another lifetime occurring before the experiencer was born into his current physical body. Yeah, I had some of those. Apparition, a vision while awake of another person living or dead who is not physically or objectively present. Mediumistic episode, communication of information or guidance by spirit using the voice, trance channeling or hand automatic writing of the experiencer who is in an altered state of consciousness and has little awareness afterwards of what was communicated. UFO sighting, the observation of an unidentified flying object, UFO, flying saucer, etc., and or its occupants without actual contact taking place. Near-death experience, coming very close to death, actually dying according to clinical criteria, and experiencing such classical NDE events as leaving the body, journeying through a tunnel, entering a world of light, receiving a presence, etc., but ultimately surviving. Spirit possession. The feeling that another mind, demon, spirit, soul of someone living or dead is attempting to take or has taken over control of the experiencer's body and will. Alien contact, actual contact with what are often called extraterrestrial beings, sometimes involving being taken aboard of UFO, frequently against the experiencer's will. Some of these experiences I consider to be major, some I consider to be minor. A minor transpersonal experience, such as the spirit possession experience, the out-of-body experience, OBE, or the near-death experience, is one where the experiencer reports also having many of the other experiences. A minor transpersonal experience, such as telepathy or synchronicity, both of which are relatively commonplace, is one where the experiencer reports having few of the other experiences. Notwithstanding the terminological distinctions, most of the TPEs, and certainly all of the major ones, appear to arise out of the state of transpersonal consciousness, out of body experiences which are a regular part of the shaman's work, closely parallel near-death experiences, except for the element of the imminence of death. Near-death experiences seem to be the most major, the most impactful of all the TPEs. They appear to represent a brief but powerful involuntary thrust into a higher state of consciousness, into a realm of profound spiritual illumination. Many shamans have had an actual NDE, that being one of the primary calls to the vocation. Given that psychic phenomena tend to be products of higher states of consciousness, it then comes as no surprise that shamans tend to frequently experience such phenomena. The psychophysical changes that occur as a result of an NDE fit the pattern of what is known as Kundalini arousal, a syndrome that Western psychology has come increasingly to recognize as being involved in certain forms of mystical experiences. Kundalini in the Hindu tradition is said to be a subtle form of bioenergy lying dormant, coiled up like a sleeping serpent, another association between snakes and healing transpersonal experiences, at the base of the spine. When the energy of Kundalini is aroused, it moves upward alongside the spine in a special channel and activates certain energy centers called chakras along the way. The arousal of Kundalini is purported to have the potential for transforming the central nervous system in such a way as to lead to genius, creativity, higher states of consciousness, psi-related experiences, mystical experiences, and spiritual enlightenment. The past, however, is often a difficult and dangerous one. Explosive and destabilizing energy transformations can occur, and these are experienced both physiologically and psychologically. Symptoms said to be associated with Kundalini arousal include intense, involuntary body movements, shaking, vibrating, jerking, and twitching. Involuntary yogic phenomena, body postures, hand movements, mental images, chants, words, and tones. Physiological problems, activation of latent illnesses, immune and autoimmune disorders, apparent heart problems, gastrointestinal problems, and intense pains, especially in the head and along the spine. Psychological emotional turbulence, intensification of unresolved issues, fear of insanity or death, extreme mood swings involving anxiety, anger, guilt, and depression, or conversely, compassion, empathy, and unconditional love. Non-sensory perceptions, visual perceptions, light, symbols, visions, entities, auditory perceptions, tones, music, voices, kinesthetic perceptions, electricity, tingling, rushes of energy, olfactory perceptions, perfume, incense, and gustatory perceptions. Psi experiences, ESP, PK, and synchronicities, and mystical experiences, states of unity, peace, love, joy, light, and energy. There is yet another link to the Eastern traditions, and it has to do with what is spoken of as the third eye, the organ of spiritual vision. According to this tradition, spiritual transpersonal vision, which used to be readily accessible to humans, has been temporarily for eons lost due to an evolutionary necessary descent into matter, but will be regained at some time in the future. The hypothesized location of the third eye appears to correspond precisely to the anatomical location of the pineal gland, and the pineal gland plays a central role in the brain's creating the conditions necessary for the emergence of transpersonal consciousness and the occurrence of transpersonal experiences. Research by the Russians has shown that the pineal gland is relatively larger in children than it is in adults and more developed in women than it is in men, and children and women appear to be more sensitive. Transpersonal.
If you understood these concepts, it would completely transform your worldview about what reality is, and it would empower you in a completely new way. Once you experience Focus 12, it's a certain frequency, a certain brainwave state that you get into where, in a way, your subconscious is more influenced, but also you have the ability to just feel into different states of emotion much easier. Now, basically, what this document shows, the CIA document that was like, hidden for a long time. There's a specific, and even the meditation in here called patterning, that's specifically the one that I've been listening to. This particular methodology is based on the belief that the thought patterns generated by our consciousness in a state of expanded awareness create holograms which represent the situation we desire to bring about, and in doing so, establish the basis for actual realization. This is all about understanding that balance of energy. So one of the things I learned is you want it to be natural for you to experience what you want. It's natural for you to be abundant. It is natural for you to be in a loving relationship. It is natural for you to have that role that you want or the business that you want. When you let it be natural, it completely changes the energy dynamic. So that was one concept. The other concept I want to share is something called pendulums. Reality transurfing is a concept called pendulums that has to do with thought structures. The idea is that even though you can't see physically certain thought structures, the idea is that because we're in a collective consciousness and we're all connected together, what happens is there's literally thoughts that come around us that we can't necessarily see. And when we're interacting with other people, we're in a way activating these different thought forms. I know this sounds esoteric, but just bear with me for a minute. Now, with pendulums, the goal of a pendulum is to gain more energy. Pendulums are thought structures that also exist within our reality, and there are very big thought structures because there are billions of people thinking similar thoughts. For example, being Republican or Democrat, whichever one you are, there are pendulums around both. And when there are thought structures around both, there's like almost like a rules of what it means to be a Democrat or Republican. And these two pendulums fight each other because they want to be right. There are pendulums around football teams. There are pendulums around sports. There are pendulums around movies, around music. There's a pendulum around my YouTube channel. And the idea behind pendulums is it gains energy the more people that focus on it. Now, what happens is when you start going down and you start taking on certain pendulums, it can, in a way, dominate your thoughts. So some people start focusing on, I see it happen a lot, conspiracy theory. They go down a rabbit hole. It then takes up so much of their life, and their field becomes very interesting, kind of like scattered, or it's like there's a lot of debris in it because they're thinking of all these things that honestly have a lot of resistance a lot of times. But then they tune more easily to more of it. The goal of pendulums is to gain energy. Now, the thing is pendulums will keep you from living in your authentic truth. They will keep you from expressing your true self. And pendulums are not always bad, but in general, they have their own intention. They have their own goal. That's why it's very important to become aware of what and when pendulums may be taking your power from you. There's pendulums around the news. There's pendulums around sports. There's pendulums around just about everything. So when people watch the news and they think they're having their own thoughts, many times it's a pendulum that's overtaking them. Then they get into fear. And that keeps them from being in their true frequency, keeps them from creating their own reality and harnessing their own energy. So pendulums, in a way, are like thought structures that you may not visibly see, but may have a certain power if you put all your energy in it and you're not aware of it. Now, what is the process of defeating a pendulum? You can't. You can't. The more you fight a pendulum, the more it grows. The purpose of these pendulums and the power in it is observing them and ignoring them if it's running your life in a negative way. The news, like you ignore the news. You don't fight the news. You just don't watch it. You don't tune to it. Become aware of that energy. So pendulums, in a way, are thought structures, and it's this weird kind of hidden esoteric concept. But once I started becoming aware of it, I started to become more aware of even the music I listen to. Because you want to know something interesting? There's certain frequencies most popular music is tuned to that keeps people in a certain frequency. I've heard, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that certain frequency of 432 hertz, which is like the frequency of the heart, frequency of love. I've heard music in general is not allowed to really be at that frequency. I don't know how true this is, but I do know that a lot of music is tuned to just a little bit above or below that kind of like keeps people in dissonance. What is your identity? But your worldview begins to change when you realize that reality is like holograms. It's literally you are shifting based on your energy to different reality potentials based on the energy you are embodying. So meditations are one of the most powerful ways of transforming your life to feel and to tap into the possibility of a new version of you. And it comes from these right here, these called the Gateway Experience. It's a set of DVDs from the 70s and the 80s, or not even DVDs, but CDs that are meditations. That actually, these cost, when I bought this back in 2017, it cost $500. And the reason I bought this is because someone that I know, that I've known my whole entire life, shared with me and said, if you get these exact CDs and you listen to these meditations, it will completely transform your consciousness. It will expand your awareness. CDs right here. And basically what they are, it's a specific technology called Hemisync that you use that of headphones with that puts your brainwave frequency into a certain pattern. Hemisync has to do with balancing the left brain and the right brain in a way that where then you can access higher states of consciousness. It uses a lot of guided imagery and guided meditations. Helps you understand more about your energetic body. It talks a lot about out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, even just beyond that though, how to get to certain states of consciousness to like influence the hologram of reality. The way reality works that show who we are at a core level, and what if there were simple hacks we could use that would show us how to completely transform our lives from the inside out. Now, what I am referring to is the declassified CIA documents that research something that is called the Gateway Process, or also known as the Gateway Experience. These are a specific training system that shows people how to, in a way, explore their own consciousness. And when you learn the aspects and the techniques that I share with you in this video, you will be able to expand your own sense of awareness about yourself and how you relate to reality itself. Even deeper than that, what are the other people in your reality? What are that of situations and circumstances that you attract into your life? What are the abilities that we have been literally just not believed we could even do? And a big part of the teachings of what we learn in here is about how we can, in a way, hack this hologram, hack this understanding by understand that we are a part of it and it is a part of us. It talks about the consciousness matrix, and some of my favorite parts of this document have to do with the different visualization techniques that are in the Gateway Experience. And it talks a lot about how we can use our own subconscious mind to reveal different information. So there's different states you can get into to problem solve. When you're in that state, it becomes very clear as how you can problem solve different things in your life. Another aspect of this, though, that's probably my favorite is called patterning. Basically, what it says is the technique of patterning recognizes the fact that since consciousness is the source of all reality, our thoughts have the power to influence the development of reality in time-space. That is, the more complicated the objective sought, the more radically it departs from our current reality. The more time the universal hologram will need to reorient our reality sphere to accommodate our desires. Monroe trainers caution against attempting to force the pace of this process because the individual could succeed in dislocating his existing reality with dramatic consequences. Basically, what it's mentioning is that everything is consciousness. When you're in this patterning state, or this what's called repatterning state, you're patterning different energies into your consciousness. Almost think of it like there's a collective field around your body. This is what my grandpa was talking about when he could see auras. There's an energy that goes around your body, which the cumulative and the momentum of energy of the thoughts you continually think go within your energetic field. Now, what happens is what it shows in this document is there's a form of toroidal field that goes around the body and even around the universe called a torus. And what happens is this toroidal field has within it those energy patterns. Now, as you shift your own energy, when you're in a certain state of consciousness, it's like that pattern continues to circle around your body to where then you are more likely to perceive in reality things that are equal to that energy. So this has to do with understanding the power of our thoughts. This has to do with understanding the power of our own energy. And when we use our subconscious mind, which is also considered our right brain, the right side of our brain, and we activate that, we can get different information that can radically shift our energy in a very powerful way. Now, everything I've shared with you up until this point is stuff that I enjoy, that I've got a lot of value out of. Color breathing is another one, where you visualize different colors that have a different intention on healing your body. And as you do, it can heal different parts of your organs, different aspects of life. A lot of this too, honestly, I believe can be very powerful permission slips. Whether it is inherently true that red does this to this organ, what if it's more so the intention and the belief behind it that then allows you to, having the intention to heal your body, to bring energy there, and where energy goes, attention goes, energy goes. Now, it talks about the idea of future, connection, quantum field. Now, let's go to page 25, okay? There's 2 or 3 sections of 25 I want to mention. Now, the most powerful part of this whole entire document that I believe where page 25 was taken out, and the reason I believe it has been taken out and now it has been revealed is because page 25 reveals a little bit more about religion and also about the nature of our reality. But even beyond that, it talks more about the activation of the pineal gland. The pineal gland, the third eye. Now, whereas a lot of the explanations of the gateway process, the gateway experience has been on that of left and right brain coherence, which really what it also mentions it does is it actually lowers the energy of the left brain, because we have been in our society, the left brain is related to logic, to planning, to management, to numbers, left brain. A lot of in society, we have been kind of primed and conditioned to be more left brain thinkers, to always be in the left brain, to always kind of be in that logical mind. The right brain is the part of us that is intuitive, the part of us that is very, very creative, that more so goes with the flow, that trusts the universe more so. It's a very different energy than that of the left brain. Now, in that of the gateway experience, one thing it does is it tampers down the energy of the left brain and increases the energy of the right brain, which is the subconscious mind, intuitive insights. Now, here's the thing that it mentions about that of these two processes, and here's where there's actually this deeper level in page 25, and that is that it actually doesn't have to do with choosing the left brain or the right brain or toning either side out. It's that when there's this complete balance, holistic balance within the brain, that's when the pineal gland activates. So first off, there's a section 35. It says left brain limitations. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I might put a little snippet of it here so you can see it. But basically, it talks about how much of the 20th century physics is using left brain linear quantitative style of reasoning to approach the same knowledge which the mystics of the old apparently acquired in a holistic, intuitive right brain style. We're talking about the information of the mystics from thousands of years, different civilizations, different enlightened masters. It did not come from just a logical perspective of the left brain. We talk about Freudian knowledge that of looking at your inner child trauma, looking at why you are the way you are. We have very much left brain is very Freudian. We look at the childhood trauma, what happened in our childhood, understanding it. The more you understand it, the more you heal. On the other side of that, you had Carl Jung, Jungian psychology. He believed more in something called synchronicity. He believed more in the subconscious mind. He did a lot of dream work. They were actually colleagues and friends. They had very different perspectives, though, of how to go about healing. Now, in an interesting way, a big part, I think a big part that was losing itself from that is a lot of the Freudian teachings, or Freud, was that it was missing this right brain component of synchronicity. Now, there's this interesting thing I was also doing. I was watching a video that was kind of talking about this and talking about how expectation is a very left brain thing. Anytime you expect something to happen, you put this pressure on something to happen. You also limit that thing happening. Imagine there's an infinite number of great things that could happen in your life. Infinite number of realities that exist. An infinite number of things the universe could give you. But then when we expect, that's when things tend to create resistance. That's when it's almost like the universe doesn't show us the magic of itself. When if we just simply trust the right brain and we trust and we go with the flow, it reveals itself in even a more magical way. I was watching this man do this exercise with his daughter where his daughter had like these 3 coffee cup tops and under it was like a little piece of paper and he would move them around, or this little little clump of paper. He'd move it around and there was a clump of paper under one of these 3 tops from his coffee cups. And what happened is she got it right, like every single time. And then he said, okay, it's very important. I expect you to get it right this time. And the moment he said that to her, she had this crazy expectation. She got it wrong every time after that. Whereas before, this little girl has all this intuitive insight connection to her right brain. She literally would get it right every time. She'd be blindfolded. He would move it around. This one. Yes. This one. Yes. This one. Yeah. Every time. All of a sudden, I expect you to do it well.
Pressure.
Okay, Daddy, I won't mess up. Missed it. Like literally, like every time she tried to get it wrong. That is an example of how the left brain sabotages ourselves towards the magic of what we already intuitively know. Okay, I wanted to kind of make that point because it was something that really impacted me when I was thinking about it, when I was learning it. Let's move down to the third part, which is inside this page 25. It talks about self-knowledge. So what it says, the mystic philosophers of old, that the first step in personal maturity could be expressed in the aphorism, know thyself. To them, the education of a man undertook at his primal step, achievement of the introverted focus so that he learned what was within himself before attempting to approach the outside world. They rightfully assumed that he could not effectively evaluate and cope with the world until he fully understood his personal psychological balance. The insights being involved by 20th century psychology in this context through the use of various kinds of personality testing seem to be revalidation of this ancient intuition. But no personality test or series of tests will ever replace the depth and fullness of the perception of self, which can be achieved when the mind alters its state of consciousness sufficiently to perceive the very hologram of itself, which it has projected onto the universe in its proper context as a part of the universal hologram in a totally holistic and intuitional way. So I'm going to kind of like summarize a lot of this, but what it is mentioning is that knowing thyself is the key to knowing thy universe, because there really is no separation. It all, as the universe, is a reflection of the self. This is why meditative practices of balancing out the left brain and the right brain can be so powerful, because when we have a certain frequency, we are able to then get to that of a higher state of consciousness, to where then we can perceive from this higher state of the pineal gland, intuitively understanding more about our reality. Now, I would say that in my own life, the one thing that has shifted my life more than anything else was back in 2012 when I learned how to observe my thoughts. Think of it when it comes to the third eye. You observe your thoughts. Think of it, left eye, right eye, connected to the left brain, the right brain. That's how it works. It's actually crossed like this. But imagine that when you are staring at a candle flame, your eyes are focused on one spot. Your eyes aren't wandering around. remember being in Bikram yoga back in the day, and they said, "My eyes that wander is a mind that wanders." Interesting. Have you ever noticed that when people are always looking around, their mind tends to be very scattered? I was talking right now, I was like, hey, so this is how I think right now. It's like every time my eyes go to a different vortex, I'll get a different like section of where I'm looking, it scatters me. Eyes that wander is a mind that wanders. A very powerful meditation practice you can use is to stare at a candle flame. Even just the way I'm looking into the camera right now, it's very easy for me to focus because I'm just looking at you. Now, left brain, right brain, duality, good, bad, light, dark, up, down. The duality of life keeps us entrained in belief systems. They know and are present. They're not identified with the mind. Remember, the mind through the eyes, left brain, right brain, up, down, good, bad, all of these things, duality, opinions, belief systems. That's where we get trapped in reality. That's where we get trapped in society. It's when you look into the news, it's like, oh my God, good, bad, which mainly is just bad, 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 bad. All this stuff's going on in the world. Everything is distracting you from knowing thyself. Why did they not want page 25 inside that document? Maybe part of it was because the activation of the pineal gland and knowing thyself is completely the opposite of what they actually want. People are much easier to control when they're not in their own power. Knowing thyself. Now, when you close your eyes to duality, you open your third eye to a new reality. You open you literally open another aspect of yourself. But that's why a lot of times you'll see in the ancient, like, philosophy, you'll see these, like, artwork of a lot of people, or of, like, enlightened masters. Their eyes are closed, but the third eye is open.
On to Focus 12, which represents a specific state of expanded awareness. In Focus 12, your awareness extends beyond your physical body and the immediate environment. You become more aware of your inner self and other aspects of consciousness that are usually outside your normal waking experience. This state allows you to perceive thoughts, emotions, and energies more clearly. You might experience vivid imagery, heightened intuition, or a sense of connection to a larger reality. And like Focus 10, your body remains deeply relaxed, but your mind is even more alert and open to new experiences. Focus 12 is also used for activities like creative visualization, problem solving, and inner exploration.
This is what I really needed to learn about myself. This was really an epiphany. To put things into the right perspective, literally. And now I can rebuild. It needed this shift. Knowing that I am that. That's my fit. Now I can rebuild from here. And go in this direction, as I was told.
What was your first experience with an OBE?
Well, I've been having spontaneous ones since I was a child, and I never thought that it's something special. I thought everybody can do that. Until at some point I realized that probably not. Mm-hmm. And so it stopped for me then.
Really?
Yes. So there's so many people in here, like, they had these amazing experiences and they carried it through life. Like, I decided, no, I don't want to be this loony, sensitive person. I want to be rational. I want to be down to earth. I will have things under my control. So I shut it off completely. I became this cynical, sarcastic person. I had a beautiful career. Because that mindset that I adopted, like, I'm going to go and get it, that worked.
Yeah.
So I had an amazing career in a multinational company. Like, really, I had so many people under me working for me. And I went on vacation. It was in Bali. I was sitting in the most expensive hotel that I could find, like, cocktails and everything. And I was sitting there like, there has to be a different kind of happiness because I did everything they told me. Like, I got a job, I have an apartment, I have a huge car, like, I have a social life, I can go out, I can travel, I can do all these things that money can buy and more. Why am I not happy then? So, at that time, Eat, Pray, Love came out. And since I was in Bali, and that book is part in Bali, the book was all over the place. So I got the book, I read it, and I was like, meditation, that's what I should do. And there's one dynamic meditation, the dynamic meditation. It's 1 hour long, and it's physically challenging. So if you try to do that physically, you will fail. The only way to do it is energetically, like as a meditation. And so I am doing that meditation. There's one place where you're, for 15 minutes, you're standing like this. And I'm standing like this, and suddenly I realize that I'm standing behind myself.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa.
So it only lasted a second, of course, because
Yep.
What happened? But ever since then, I was really going for that meditation, and that slowly started coming back. And then Monroe happened, and then these experiences, they just came back. But see, that's what they all tell you. It's not a big deal.
Chapter 4. Different Brains. In Chapter 2, I stated that the primary defining characteristic of ASPs, including shamans, is their ability to voluntarily enter and leave altered states of consciousness, more specifically the state of transpersonal consciousness. I also stated that ASPs are born, not made, because their neurological structuring is different from the norm. Consciousness is a fascinating but elusive phenomenon. It is impossible to specify what it is, what it does, or why it evolved. Nothing worth reading has been written about it. Stuart Sutherland. My task now is to identify those differences in neurological structuring and to explain how they came to be. In a so-called normal brain, there is a hemispherical asymmetry with portions of the left cerebral hemisphere being larger than their equivalents in the right hemisphere. In a minority of the population, this asymmetry is non-existent or even occasionally reversed. This results in a brain that is less strongly lateralized than the norm. In such cases, there tends to be an enlargement of the corpus callosum, the primary bundle of fibers connecting the two hemispheres of the brain. Functionally, a L-cell brain, which is characteristic of the anomalously sensitive person, has a greater than normal participation of the right cerebral hemisphere in those functions that are normally under the purview of the left hemisphere, most notably language and motor control handedness. If the brain was so simple we could understand it, we would be so simple we could not. Lyle Watson. The transpersonal abilities of ASPs have quite a history. A greater than normal participation of the right cortical hemisphere in the functioning of the brain suggests a greater than normal participation of the old brain limbic system as well, because of the strong connections that exist between the limbic system and the right temporal lobe. Emotions arise in the limbic system, and those people who have a greater than normal involvement of the limbic system in their cognitive process, i.e., those with LSL brains, are more likely than the norm to have their perceptions and behaviors guided by subjective emotional evaluations rather than objective rational ones. While the cortex may contain an individual's model of reality, it is the limbic system that determines the relevance of that model. At the level of the limbic system, cognition deals with both externally stimulated perceptions and internally generated imagery, both by way of the same neuronal components, and it is therefore unable to distinguish between them. Moreover, the limbic system functions as the conduit through which information from the brain's central core is channeled to the cortex. What all of this appears to suggest is that the limbic system functions as a regulator of the cortex. When an individual is in an altered state of consciousness, specifically in a state of transpersonal consciousness, the cortex can be thought of as idling. With cortical idling, the limbic system is free to create vivid imagery in all sensory modalities and to project that imagery out into the environment. In the absence of cortical reality judgment, these extremely vivid images are perceived as more real than real. That is, they assume the status of perception, not just that of imagination or fantasy. And they are powerfully impressed upon awareness. Science's biggest mystery is the nature of consciousness. About all we know about consciousness is that it has something to do with the head rather than the foot. Nick Herbert. This process, called the Perky effect, is named for psychologist C.W. Perky, who performed experiments along such lines in 1910. Perky's work demonstrated not only that human brains construct perceptions, but also that perceptions and internally generated images both utilize the same mental mechanisms. Thus, the differentiation of imagery as an internal event from perception as an internal representation of an external event becomes confounded, and the consolidation process for memory does not distinguish between them. Absent effective cortical reality judgment, perception and imagery are remembered as being equally real. The components of the limbic system are extremely sensitive to stressors, including such things as electromagnetic radiation, hyperventilation, sleep deprivation. Yeah, that's a big one. Physiological imbalances, simple sensory overload, yes. Trauma, drugs, and toxins. Repeated exposure to stressors can lead to alterations of limbic system structuring, such that the threshold for neuronal hypersynchrony a heightened level of synchrony in the neuronal structures is progressively lowered, a process known as kindling, and sensitivity extends to ever more subtle stimuli. Some people with neuronal hypersynchrony, presumably ASPs, exhibit many of the same symptoms as those who have temporal limbic epilepsy, yet do not experience full-blown seizures, so they cannot appropriately be diagnosed as having TLE. Such a situation suggests that they might be experiencing Kundalini arousal. When the extremely vivid images associated with neuronal hypersynchrony occur in the hypnagogic state, they are spoken of as hypnagogic hallucinations, since such hallucinations result from the overlapping of a dreaming state of consciousness onto a prevailing waking state of consciousness. It can be seen that the only substantive difference between dreams and hallucinations is the particular set of prevailing brainwave patterns in which each appears. Perceptions such as these are considered to be entirely normal during that portion of a person's life spent in a dreaming state of consciousness, but are considered to be distinctly abnormal during the 2/3 of a person's life spent in a nominal waking state of consciousness. This reasoning supports the argument for the existence of a neurological mechanism called the serotonin screening mechanism that normally blocks such imagery in the waking state, but does so less effectively in those who are prone to hypnagogia, i.e. those who have less strongly lateralized brain. A reduction in serotonin levels in a nominal waking state of consciousness can inactivate inhibitory mechanisms, permit increased activity of dopamine, another neurotransmitter, elevated levels of which are associated with schizophrenia, and lead to the emergence of hallucinatory symptoms. Yeah, that's how they are labeled. The neurotransmitter serotonin develops in the pineal gland where it interacts with the amino acid tryptophan to produce the hormone melatonin. As part of the brain, the pineal gland has reciprocal links with the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the hippocampus, and the amygdala. As part of the endocrine system, the pineal gland has reciprocal links with the pituitary gland, the thymus gland, the thyroid and parathyroid glands, and the adrenal glands, as well as the reproductive organs and pancreas. There is an inverse relationship between the production of serotonin and the production of melatonin in the pineal gland. When serotonin levels go down, melatonin levels go up, and vice versa. Light stimulates the production of serotonin, and darkness stimulates the production of melatonin. Nobody knows for certain what the interplay between serotonin and melatonin is all about. While one researcher may argue that a low level of serotonin is responsible for a given phenomenon, another might claim that a high level of melatonin is responsible. All indications are, however, that those with less strongly lateralized brains have pineal glands that are more sensitive than the norm. What does seem clear is that serotonin serves to dampen the brain's reaction to incoming stimuli, and that serotonin is released whenever it appears necessary to block excessive or unnecessary stimuli. While perception of such stimuli has historically been thought of as hallucinations, modern holistic brain researchers are now recognizing that the brain functions as a filtering mechanism that allows perception of only a small part of a much larger reality to enter into conscious awareness. Since hallucinations are generally agreed to arise out of impaired sensory input coupled with impaired cortical reality judgment, what then is to be made of enhanced sensory input coupled with enhanced subcortical reality sense? This is likely to be the case with those whose brains are less strongly lateralized than the norm. Consider, for example, the simplistically overstated case of an individual whose olfactory acuity is equivalent to that of a dog, with corresponding emotional and behavioral responsiveness. Olfactory stimulus. Such a person might well be perceived not as having an exceptional ability, but as suffering from hallucinations, as being mentally ill, and as possibly requiring medical intervention. Such is the stupidity. Presumably, that is an unrealistically extreme example, but it may perhaps also be an appropriate parody of something that happens in the mental health field with distressing regularity. Yeah. Some very interesting corollaries are associated with all of this. Consider these, for example. A decrease in cortical activity does not necessarily result in a decrease in awareness. It results only in a decrease in the specificity of awareness, specificity related to sequential, temporal, and spatial relationships. Realness, meaning the sense of reality as opposed to the judgment of reality, may be a function of decreased cortical activity accompanied by increased subcortical activity. The perceptions of subcortical awareness are subjective, synesthetic, and flexible. The perceptions of cortical awareness are objective, discrete, and stabilized. Hallucinogenic drugs evidently achieve their effect by inhibiting the production of serotonin, with an accompanying surfeit of dopamine, thereby reducing cortical awareness and enhancing subcortical awareness. When melatonin, which, as previously stated, is complementary to serotonin, is metabolized in the pineal gland, it is converted to methoxytryptamine. Tryptamines are abundantly present in certain hallucinogenic tropical plants. The deficit of serotonin, with an accompanying surfeit of dopamine, as previously stated, that apparently underlies the schizophrenic's experience of being overloaded, hyper-agitated by stimuli, may to a lesser extent be an operative factor in anyone with a brain that is less strongly lateralized than the norm. This brings us to the subject of hallucinogens. During the 1950s, researchers discovered that the chemical composition of most hallucinogens closely resembles that of serotonin. They hypothesized that hallucinogens act on consciousness by fitting into the same cerebral receptors as serotonin, and by blocking the uptake of serotonin set the stage for the experience of hallucinations. Many shamans have expert knowledge of medicinal and hallucinogenic plants native to their area. Most famous probably ayahuasca or the San Pedro cactus, and often learn directly from the plants, harnessing their effects after obtaining permission from the appropriate plant spirits. Hallucinogens, when employed in a religious, shamanic, or spiritual context, are properly called entheogens, literally generating the divine within. Yeah, it's my favorite name. Entheogens have been used in ritualized contexts for thousands of years. Examples of traditional entheogens include peyote, cactus, psilocybin mushrooms, uncured tobacco, the mapacho, cannabis, ayahuasca, salvia divinorum, Cabernet iboga, Ipomoea tricolor, and Amanita muscaria, my favorite. Another element that is important to our explorations is that those with LSL brains seem to have a heightened sensitivity to all substances that affect the central nervous system. Caffeine, alcohol, totally. Marijuana, and presumably the entire spectrum of psychotropic drugs. Psychotropic meaning those SSRIs, benzodiazepines, those bad ones that make you dependent and fuck you up, and if you want to come off of it, you get suicidal. It's very hard to get off of them. Temper down, so best not take them seriously. Studies have shown that those with presumably LSL brains exhibit greater changes in response to the administration of various drugs, including antihistamines, sedatives, antidepressants, those too, antipsychotics, several experimental drugs, and even aspirin, than do those with normal brains. Yeah, and this should be a known fact, and not doctors gaslighting you and telling you, oh, this is not so. It's all in your head. I'm the expert. No, they should take you seriously and not tell you that your experience is wrong, because it isn't. You have more extreme symptoms. I do for sure. Especially paradoxical symptoms like serotonin syndrome. That's a nasty one. Horrible. So trust your perception, trust your experience. Don't let doctors gaslight you. If you are sensitive, you are sensitive. And that is that. Dealing with the subject of hallucinations is tricky. While it is generally assumed that hallucinations absent the ingestion of hallucinogenic substances are evidence of significant psychopathology, that is not necessarily true. No, it is not true. That's such a stupid word, hallucinations. As shown by previous discussion of hypnagogic hallucinations, in order to further explore this subject, a definition of the term hallucinations is in order, and the one provided by Kasi Assad in his book Hallucinations in Clinical Psychiatry provides a starting point. Hallucinations are perceptions that occur in the absence of corresponding external stimuli. On the surface, this definition appears to be clear-cut and simple, but since one of the central issues in this discussion is whether or not transpersonal experiences are really real, it warrants closer examination. At issue is the question of what is meant by external stimuli. Most people would agree that external stimuli are those stimuli that are said to exist in the world of objective reality. Most people would also agree that the objective reality status of such stimuli is a function of their being able to be quantified and or qualified by objective scientific methodologies. The assumption underlying such thinking, however, implies that reality as such does not exist beyond the boundaries of current scientific thinking. It wasn't too long ago that germs, viruses, and atoms, let alone such things as quarks, gluons, and mesons, would not have qualified for objective reality status. Carrying this line of thinking a step further, one has to wonder about the current reality status of something as simple as the feeling of love. From a scientific perspective, love is neither quantifiable or qualifiable. Yet most reasonable people would agree that love is really real, that it is not a hallucination. In practice, reality status is generally determined by consensus. If the majority of people agree that something is real, whether objectively so or not, then it is real. If the majority agrees that it is not real, then it is not. For the purposes of this book, then, a more useful definition of hallucinations would be perceptions that occur in the apparent absence of corresponding stimuli in consensus reality. Most thinking about reality is focused on consensus reality, and consensus reality is determined by the majority in accordance with their perceptions and their cortical reality judgments. In other words, the empirical basis for distinguishing reality from hallucination at a specific moment in time is the consensus of the majority of people drawing on their experience while in a waking ordinary state of consciousness. For me, that is insufficient ground for the assignment of a pathologizing psychiatric diagnosis. Good placebo responders are able to make real and suggested benefits of the treatment. Make real is something very different from the idea to pretend to be real. In the appropriate altered state of consciousness, the benefits become real. The immune system accepts them as real, and the rest of the body follows suit. Imagination and belief are both vitally important to the efficacy of this process. But I think it is also vitally important that an individual feels safe and trusts the shaman or whatever therapist. That feeling safe, that trusting, that feeling a connection, it is essential. Because then you can relax and you go into the parasympathetic state. And in the parasympathetic state, when you are not in fight, flight, when you are really, as I said, relaxed, the GABA activation also happens, and the breath is deeper, and automatically those are the criteria to set the stage for physical healing and deprocessing also. Imagination and belief are both vitally important to the efficacy of this process. The introduction of doubt or skepticism, distrust by medical personnel, family, and friends, or an experimental observer can totally undermine the power of the placebo response, indeed. And also gaslight you, the client, in terms of not believing you, not taking you seriously. That effect has been called the experimenter effect. The experimenter effect occurs frequently in any setting where the capabilities of the human mind are being explored. Today, in the Western medical system, such an approach to healing is often spoken of as psychoneuroimmunology, a term that refers to the complex interactions that occur between one's psychology, one's neurology, and one's immunology. At the most basic level, it can be said that if one's psychology is truly oriented toward healing, one's immune system will cooperate and affect that healing, provided one has the right neurology and or training. The right neurology appears to be that of the ASP. Specifically, neurology involving a brain that is less strongly lateralized than the norm. The potentials for neo-shamanism, Chapter 6. For many centuries, the prevalence of shamanism throughout the world has been declining. Western views of shamanism as primitive, superstitious, backward, and outdated have caused many shamans to abandon their practice because they felt mocked by the people in their own community and regarded their own past as deprecating. As shamanic practices ceased to exist and authentic shamans died off, their experiences and their memories died with them. As a result, much of the history, the beliefs, the traditions, the songs, and the symbols have been lost to us forever. Moreover, organized religions, fuck them, have applied intense pressure to those in shamanic cultures to convert to their own beliefs, systems, and fucking doctrines. The history of the Catholic Church in dealing with shamanism is illustrative, and also how they dealt with the Cathars. The Inquisition was basically there to eradicate the Cathars. And the Catholic Church wanted all the power. That's why they killed everybody else who believed in different things and didn't conform to the shit of the Catholic Church. For 300 years after Jesus Christ, many of his followers performed great works of healing. The ability to heal was seen as a sign of spiritual power, and when it became clear that some people not high in the church could heal better than those who were indoctrinated of greater authority, the ministry of healing was forbidden because of its destabilizing influence on the church hierarchy. I really wish that all those modern Christians that so loudly proclaim that they believe in Jesus Christ, which is so ridiculous to me, because they don't know the history, all the killing that went before that church established its dominance. Yeah? You goddamn idiots. You are so stupid. Just citing the Bible, not knowing the truth. Idiots, morons. You cannot be taken seriously, all those who preach the Bible. So despicable. the history of the church, like the history of almost any institution, that's what it is, an institution. It is a history of power politics. From its inception, the primary objective of the church is keeping with the institutional imperative, was to ensure its own survival and continuation. That's what a parasite does. Any group, individual, or idea that was perceived as a threat was either ignored, suppressed, or eliminated, killed, in other words, burned at the stake. Yeah? As the situation warranted, all the Cathars were extinguished and killed because they did not comply with the church. People with a Gnostic, from the Greek gnosis, meaning knowledge, orientation, have been a major problem for the church since its beginning. The Cathars were basically also Gnostics. Gnostics hold that one's relationship with God appropriately involves direct and personal knowledge, or spiritual, religious, mystical experiences, and how keen they are to eliminate the mystical experiences. For example, fucking up the ketamine experience. So if you get a ketamine infusion, they put benzodiazepine into it halfway through when you are dazed and cannot say no. And then they eliminate the visual experience, the mystical experience. They kill it. They are afraid that you could have the personal knowledge with God or whatever you want to call it. They try to kill it off by any means, and they try to create a psilocybin mushroom that has no mystical experience. It's so stupid. This wanting to control the narrative and preventing people from actually healing through their own personal mystical experience and direct relationship with the divine. Historically, the Gnostic position undermined the Church's arrogation of the role of intermediary between man and God, and therefore could not be tolerated. So it wasn't, and so they killed everybody. In Europe, the Gnostic traditions were continued by members of the Merovingian dynasty. The Merovingian were said to be of Davidic descent, and they were known as the long-haired kings, because they wore their hair much longer than was then the custom. Their hair was generally red or blonde, and their fair translucent skin with visible veins, I have that too, gave rise to the term blue blood in reference to royalty, whatever. The priestly cult of the Merovingians was not dissimilar to that of the Druids, and they were greatly revered as esoteric teachers, judges, faith healers, and clairvoyants with a Gnostic orientation. In 496 AD, the Catholic Church made a pact with this dynasty, pledging itself perpetuity of the Merovingian bloodline. 200 years later, however, King Dagobert II, with his Gnostic beliefs, had become a powerful threat to the Church, and he was therefore assassinated in 697 AD. With this betrayal of the Merovingians, the Church rendered itself guilty of a crime that would be neither rationalized nor expunged, so it was suppressed. Despite this perfidy, the Merovingians continued to maintain a significant presence in Europe, so in 751 AD, Pope Zachary had King Childeric III seized, tonsured, and incarcerated. In Childeric's place, Zachary installed a family of regional mayors who became known as the Carolingian dynasty. The Merovingians then went into hiding for about 400 years, but by the early 1100s they were in a position to make an attempt at regaining the former power. Meanwhile, in Britain, when the Christians came to power, anything that had important spiritual meaning to those they considered heathens automatically became anathema, and every effort was made to eradicate it. Wyrd, with its connotation of strange, bizarre, supernatural, and unworldly, was a deliberate Christian distortion of the concept of Wyrd. By 1000 AD, the shamans of the indigenous population had been largely replaced by Christian missionaries, at least in the circles of the ruling elite. Among the general populace, however, the traditional attitudes, methods, and values continued to survive for another several hundred years. Eventually, the Church launched its now infamous witch-hunting trials to eliminate the competition presented by the female shamanic practitioners who had generally been ignored by the original Christian missionaries, and to solidify the fucking shitty church's domination and control of the people. The Merovingians in Europe claimed that their bloodline involved direct descendancy from Jesus Christ, and while they themselves would have known of their pedigree and ancestry, they probably would not have been able to prove their bloodline identity to the world at large, and such proof may well have been deemed necessary for their subsequent designs. When the Knights Templars, a heavily armed Christian military organization identifiable by their white capes with red cross insignia, were formed in 1119 AD and subsequently officially recognized by the Church in 1128 AD, one of their responsibilities, with broader support from the Cathars, became that of protecting the Merovingian bloodline and guarding its secrets. At the time, it was believed that the hereditary proof of the Merovingians needed could be found in Jerusalem, and the Templars, operating under a cloak of secrecy, undertook excavations beneath the Temple of Solomon. It is believed by some that they were successful and that they brought the treasured proof, along with large quantities of monetary treasure, back to Europe, where it was deposited at the Cathar stronghold of Monseigneur in the Pyrenees. If you want to learn more about the Cathars and their history, read this book, Talisman. Before long, the Catholic Church, feeling threatened by the strength of the Gnostically oriented Cathars, and perhaps specifically by this proof, launched the Albigensian Crusade against them. Monseigneur was the last Cathar stronghold to come under attack, and after withstanding repeated assaults for 10 months, it finally capitulated in March of 1244 AD. Note the number. It is said, however, that before the fall, 4 men managed to escape from the garrison, carrying with them the purported proof of the Merovingian bloodline. Their destination was then, and is to this day, unknown. The Crusades very effectively dealt with organized resistance to domination by the Church, and that was the downfall of humanity. The Inquisition, in like manner, eliminated individual heretics, those who had the audacity. The Church is fucking goddamn insane. That's what it is. And unfortunately, they had the means to overpower everybody else. But the Church is the parasitic entity, not the heretics. Most victims of the Inquisition were women, of course. They were branded as witches and burned at the stake. Most perpetrators of the Inquisition were, of course, men. As with the Cathars and with the Merovingians before them, the Catholic Church came to feel threatened by the strength of the Templars. They just didn't want to share. So typical left hemisphere perception. God damn it. Why did they overpower everybody? Such a fucking plague on humanity. In 1307 AD, King Philip IV of France, under the direction of Pope Clement V, ordered the arrest of the Templars. While many escaped, purportedly going to Scotland, the primary leaders were burned at the stake, and the order was formally disbanded by papal decree in 1312 AD, while the Templars were said to have reconstituted themselves as the Freemasons. Little has been heard about the Templars since that time. In modern times, the survival of shamanism has been primarily limited to indigenous peoples and how were they treated. Yeah, they were suppressed and killed off and put into reservations and all that. Living in tundras, jungles, deserts, and other isolated environments, and luckily some of those indigenous tribes have not been discovered to this day. For many years, knowledge of the shamans was almost as isolated as were the environments of the shamans. Western interest in shamanism began to develop in the 1960s, however, primarily in the San Francisco Bay Area, where a small but growing network of adventurous psychologists, anthropologists, botanists, chemists, poets, musicians, and bohemians were experimenting with traditional entheogens and the newly synthesized drug LSD. And then the CIA came into this harmonious experimenting and fucked everything up. And later this fucker Nixon proclaimed the war on drugs, similar to the church, just suffocating the spirit and the connection, the personal connection to the divine, just suffocated, eradicated, and invent some excuse to do so. Anyway, as a result, they began to understand something of what the traditional shamans had already known for many centuries. With the publication of the English language version of Mircea Eliade's book on shamanism, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy in 1964, they came to understand that they were not discovering new territory, but rather rediscovering old. Interest began to develop in preserving the historical shamanic traditions, primarily under the umbrella of Michael Harner's Foundation of Shamanic Studies. Some individuals undertook to reinvent shamanism in a modern form, often drawing from core shamanism, a set of beliefs and practices synthesized by Harner, centered on the use of ritual drumming and dance, and Harner's interpretations of various indigenous religions. As I have argued earlier, true shaman is born, with the neurology of an anomalously sensitive person, not made. So fuck these plastic shamans. True shamans may guide and support others in learning the strategies, techniques, and philosophies of shamanism, but shamanism itself cannot be taught. Becoming a true shaman is essentially a personal, individual undertaking, and the idea of a credentialed shaman is absurd. A true shaman would never subscribe to a system that involves credentialing by others, let alone attend conferences, conventions, and such. Originality and creativity are the shaman's stock in trade, and she can only effect change or transformation by operating outside the traditional organizational frameworks. The shaman is a soul practitioner who will always be an outsider. While few are born with the sensitivities necessary to be true shamans, many more might be willing to adopt the shamanic world view of Wyrd if they are shown the way. Today's neo-shamans can be their guides. Given the current state of the world, such guidance is very much needed. We have met the enemy, and he is us. Walt Kelly, 1970 Pogo cartoon. As stated in the introduction, the modern worldview based on anthropocentrism, humanism, rationalism, mechanism, and materialism authorizes and even encourages aggression, exploitation, and destruction. Grounded in a literal fundamentalist interpretation of Genesis 1:28, in which humans are said to have been given domination over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the face of the earth. I mean, this is so arrogant. Its tacit assumption is that the world and everything in it exists for our benefit and that we are free to do with it as we please. And thus we treat Mother Earth like an object. Kill the trees and everything else. Our multitudinous machinations, our fantasies and our fears, our ignorance and our irresponsibility, our enthusiasm and our egocentricity, our possessiveness and our politics have led to a situation in which the state of the world reflects the state of our minds, in which the conflict without mirrors the conflict within, in which the external chaos echoes the internal chaos. In short, we tend to perceive ourselves as being separate from and superior to everything else, as well as separate from and superior to each other. As a species, we emphasize separateness over interconnectedness, independence over interdependence, and differences over similarities. Such a posture provides few checks and balances against our aggressive tendencies, and aggress we do against nature in particular, against each other, wars, and all that, and against ourselves. The shamanic worldview of Wyrd, on the other hand, provides a viable, life-enhancing alternative for human behavior. Taken seriously, experienced directly, and lived as if the future of humankind depended on it, which it does, Wyrd would permit us to perceive our individual selves as sharing a common identity and a common destiny with all other human beings, to Not just human beings, everybody. Animals, plants, trees, everything, the whole earth. To accept all living things as being interconnected and interdependent, and to honor the earth as a living entity vital to our survival. Instead of separation, conflict, alienation, and chaos, the human experience would be one of unity, harmony, cooperation, and order. From a psychological perspective, a change such as this would help people both individually and collectively to satisfy one of their deepest needs, that of connectedness and belonging.
All people who use these techniques of shamanism in any indigenous culture, any of the traditional cultures around the world, all seem to use a map that is drawn on the same territory. All of these maps have certain things in common. They have, if not three worlds, at least three areas of worlds, sometimes multiple branches, all connected by a single axis mundi, one axis that joins and allows passage between these three worlds. Now, for the sake of our workshop here, we're going to be calling this axis mundi the world tree. In many cases, this is known as a magic mountain. In some cases, it's a sacred river. For us, it's a world tree. And these three worlds are very simply known as the lower world, the middle world, and the upper world. Now, one of the reasons that I believe that all shamans, all shamanic practitioners everywhere have gravitated to this map is that this is a map drawn on the actual territory of the spirit realms. It is also a map that reflects the fractal nature of shamanic work. What I mean by that is that in a very similar way, the human body itself is a map of the three worlds. Within our own body, we have the spine, which is the world tree. We have the upper world, the middle world, and the lower world. We carry this map with us in everything we do, all of our actions, all of our thoughts, our whole lives. What I want to talk about today is just a little bit about that shamanic map and about how we map the soul and about what it means to be a human being and to do this work of shamanic practice. So in shamanic traditions, when we talk about the soul, we mean something a lot more than what people in this day and age usually think of when they think of the soul. I mean, let's face it, most people in our culture tend to think of the soul as, well, little more than the medium by which we receive our just rewards in the afterlife, and not really something to pay a whole lot of attention to while we're alive. For the traditional shamanic practitioner, or even for someone living in a tribal culture, the soul is something much more, something much richer. In fact, the soul is their identity in a very real sense. Partially, this is because the soul has more than an individual identity. The soul is not just you. The soul is, certainly in the ancestral sense, it is your entire bloodline. If you sit here in this moment and imagine your father standing behind your right shoulder, your mother standing behind your left shoulder, their parents standing behind them, and all of those ancestors that you've descended from, reaching back behind them into the mists of history, and realize for this moment that all of these people are one communal being, and that you are the tip of this communal soul, the one that is in this present moment, then you have an inkling of what it is like to be a traditional tribal person who identifies himself as that whole rather than simply the tip of the iceberg. Now, there are other parts to the soul as well, and you'll find this in many cultures. We look at the other main part as the celestial soul, because this is a part that has had many lifetimes before and will probably have many lifetimes after this one. And so it's a little bit like having an x-axis represented by the ancestral soul and a y-axis represented by the celestial soul, and they both come together in this moment, in this body, to become you. So who you are, who I am in this moment, is not so much a thing, but a relationship between all these diverse parts, all of these ancestors and all their blessings. And it comes together in this moment in a way that allows us to open to greater realization, to greater awakening, but most importantly, to the experience of being here in this moment. And realizing this moment, just as we realize that we are more than the individual, we are also capable of more than we can begin to realize in this moment. We're constantly opening our eyes to a deeper, richer, fuller sense of what we mean by real. We now have the opportunity with these teachings to sit here, not just with me, but with each other, to join in a greater communal soul, something like a tribe, and to embrace these teachings, to welcome these teachings into our souls in a way that will change not only us as individuals, but will benefit our ancestors, will benefit our families, will benefit our communities. Every community that we are a part of benefits from anything which we benefit from.
Is your really deep interest in shamanism and expertise there, and then the Bob Monroe stuff. So I'm just kind of curious, which one came first?
Well, it's interesting because they both kind of came at the same time almost. I did start with core shamanism, which is Michael Harner's work, which is the work I teach. And while I was learning some of that, I read Journeys Out of the Body, and I thought, okay, this is someone who sort of gets, based on an experience I had, this is someone who sort of gets the bizarreness of some of this work that we can experience. And so Robert Monroe, I ended up attending the Monroe Institute, going to a gateway, getting information, that sort of thing, and then fell in love, of course, with Hemisync frequencies to enter a consciousness state. Same with, it's similar to a drum to enter a consciousness state in shamanism.
Mm-hmm. It is, yeah, exactly right.
So I sort of did was doing both at the same time.
And that seems to be often how it goes. You know, everything kind of changes at once.
Yeah.
So was there a specific event or a series of events that kind of gave rise to this turn in your life?
Yeah. So my spiritual awakening was a little odd, and I was driving home one night from a class, and I was calling my husband just to tell him I was on my way back, and the call kept dropping, which it had never done before. And I was out in Illinois on some county roads, and it was almost to the point where I became strangely obsessed with the phone call dropping. Instead of just letting it go, I kept looking down to redial. He'd answer, say hello, and I'd say hey, and then boom, it would hang up again. And then there was a point on the road where I was not paying attention at all. I'm driving over 55 miles an hour on a county highway, and I heard, as if someone was sitting in my car, I heard, put the phone down now, and the now was just emphasized. And I was startled. I dropped the phone. I looked up just in time to see all of the cars in front of me had already completely stopped on the highway. And I slammed on my brakes, and I squeezed my eyes closed. I slammed because I thought I was going to hit the person behind me, and it didn't happen. And I kind of opened my eyes and looked in my rearview mirror, expecting everybody behind me to hit me, and it didn't happen. It was just this. I really felt that it could have been a really critical situation, and it felt like a near-death type of experience. And I was not injured, but I started to shake. I started convulsing. I kind of went into shock. I was turning the car lights on inside of my interior, trying to find the voice that went with that, and there was no one there. And so I drove home, and the next day, I told my husband about it, and the next day, I'll say that everything just started to break loose. It was fast and furious, and I started hearing more and more, and clairaudient, and I needed someone to help me, but there was nobody I knew who had an experience like this. And that's where Michael Harner from the Foundation for Shamanic Studies and Robert Monroe from the Monroe Institute, that is how I started to unravel what was happening to me, just based on their experiences and their information. You focus more in core shamanism, which is the general it's general shamanism as defined by Michael Harner, who was an anthropologist many, many, many years ago. And he pulled out from different cultures what all the cultures seem to be doing. For example, he defines a shaman as someone who takes journeys, spiritually conscious journeys, using a sonic driver, and one of them is a drum. You can use click sticks and didgeridoos. There's all these different ways to get in, rattles. And so he kind of defined what was missing in so much of our culture.
With the shamans, the invisible world is where everything is happening. Early on in my academic life, I slowly began to understand that we don't have a healthcare system, we have a disease care system. And the idea of the shamans is not to heal cancer or heart disease or dementia, but to prevent them. I had contact with an indigenous group that were prophecy keepers. What they were doing was working with the luminous energy field that organizes your health as well as your experiences in the world. Effortless quality to being in the flow of your own journey. The minute you begin to participate with those natural dynamics, then you step into the divine place and to say, hey, you are also a creator. It's an act of courage, but life will keep bringing you to it until you say yes one day. And I think that that's what we can all do. We're all called to do that.
In other words, helping people to achieve their highest human potential is an important driving force in my life. I'd like to introduce you to a different kind of audio series that I have produced in collaboration with Monroe Products, called the Shaman's Heart Program, The Path of Authentic Power, Purpose, and Presence. This audio series contains the culmination of my life's work thus far, a unique integration of shamanic practices with core elements of transpersonal psychology and ancient wisdom teachings. When you combine this approach with Hemisync technology, what you get is a powerful, synergistic set of tools that can open you to new worlds of perception and new possibilities for living a soul-based and heart-centered life. What I find most exciting about this audio series is the unique opportunity to blend so many positive influences into one affordable package. As we move further along into this rapidly transforming 21st century, we don't need to abandon the wisdom of our ancient cultures. By immersing ourselves in these authentic transpersonal and shamanic practices and supporting it with today's impressive technology, we can emerge more integrated, more whole, and create a more peaceful and sustainable world for ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren.